about what this debate's about. It's not, as it may appear from the motion and the amendment, whether we oppose Tory cuts or implementing. The reality is what both proposals, both the amendment and the main motion, are proposing is that we implement cuts. What they disagree on is which cuts we implement. The DUP's proposal is to implement welfare reform, and we've seen various reports produced as to much that will take out of benefits coming into Northern Ireland. The one that I find seems to have most basis in fact is the NICFA 250 million on top of cuts that have already been made to welfare. That's the DUP's proposal, and to be fair, they've been pretty upfront about it. As has been mentioned previously in the debate, they brought forward a bill. We were able to debate it. Had it come back, we would have been able to make amendments, and indeed prior to that, the DUP brought forward a motion welcoming the introduction of universal credit. It's pretty much known that the DUP are maybe opposed to elements of welfare reform, but ultimately there's much of it which they agree with, because there's many other elements that I believe the Minister could have brought back with changes. For example, the sanctions for something as simple as a missed appointment. You can lose your benefits for 3 months. There's no cost implication. There's no reason why we'd have to breach parity to change that. That's the type of thing, maybe, had the DUP been more enthusiastic about really challenging the welfare cuts that we could have come back with. But Sinn Féin's proposal is not a rejection of cuts. We've had the October monitoring round. We are implementing cuts. It has happened. It's been necessary. I don't necessarily criticise them for taking that decision, for agreeing the October monitoring round. It was a necessary, pragmatic thing to do. What I do maybe criticise is the pretence that somehow by saying no to the Tory cuts that we're somehow protected, and it's not the case when we will see £87 million coming out of our budget this year. So essentially it's a choice between two cuts. Do we cut welfare to some of the most vulnerable in our society, the poor, the sick, the unemployed, in an economic downturn? Or do we cut public services? Both of which...
The member give way?
Yes, I'll give way.
I'm interested in the member's argument about parity and where we make cuts. How does he feel that we should address the issue of super parity? Because there are areas where we do better than the other areas of the United Kingdom, and surely we might have to consider reducing those areas just to bring us back to parity.
Member has an extra minute.
Well, I'm more wedded to us making our own choices for Northern Ireland than I am wedded to parity. We make the choices and we take the consequences. And there are areas, for example, our passenger duty, where we chose to break parity and take the financial hit on that. And I think that's a choice, and again, one we should be open about, because that was another cut that we voluntarily introduced to our block grant. But ultimately, whatever way we make these cuts, it will fall disproportionately in the most vulnerable in our society. But what's really incredible, what really makes the Sinn Féin position in particular a farce, is that they're now going to go back to the Treasury and say, can we have more cuts, please? Can we cut corporation tax, which will see up to 700 million come out of public sector spending? That will be a voluntary cut that we're going to beg for, that we're going to ask for. And Sinn Féin said in this debate that their priority was to protect the poor and the most vulnerable in our society, when it's clear that the corporation tax cut shows that their priority is to equalise tax across Ireland, to get the step closer to United Ireland, because that has been, is and always will be their priority. And if the most vulnerable have to suffer in the short term, they believe it's worth it in the long term. That's their policy. They go to the electorate and they get voted in on that basis, but at least be honest about it. You're going to voluntarily impose a tax cut, or a cut in public services to give a tax break to those in big businesses. I don't see how anybody from either side of the House can argue that we cannot afford £87 million to protect welfare spending to the most vulnerable, but we can afford anything between 200 million if we want to take the DUP's figures, to 700 million if we want to take the Treasury's figure per year to give a tax break to big businesses. And we're already choosing. We have a debate in the minute at Westminster about whether or not there should be a mansion tax. We have a mansion tax break in that we put a cap on rates, therefore that the poorest homeowners in our society subsidise those with the largest houses. So instead of having a mansion tax, we've done the reverse and given a mansion tax break. The issue of make work pay has come up continuously, yet again this Assembly made its choice and rejected my proposal for a living wage in all public sector contracts. We're not interested in make work pay. This whole agenda is about punishing the poor for being poor. It's not, as I say, it's not an argument about whether or not we should have cuts. There's no one proposing in either the motion or the amendment to do anything that would stop the cuts. It's which way we hit the poorest hardest. I don't think that's acceptable. I don't think it's good enough, and I think it's time that our two main parties stop pointing the finger at each other and stop simply saying no to the Tories and work out solutions rather than problems.
Thank you. And I call the Minister.